Hannah.
Hi, Deb.
All right. So it's Tuesday, and that means Tuesday at 3 o'clock. That means it's Success Without School time, everybody. If this is your first time here on The Reason We Learn at Success Without School, welcome. I hope you will subscribe so you can be notified each week when we have this show. This is a show where we talk about thinking outside the box when it comes to education for your children, for yourself, perhaps, and finding solutions that are not contained within school walls, possibly even doing without school altogether to get that education. So today's topic, and even if you're not new here, please like, share, and comment, like to feed the algorithm and get more people here. We find that our audience contributes a tremendous amount to these live broadcasts, asking questions, contributing their own thoughts. And so we want to get that conversation going. Today, Hannah and I have decided to talk about kids working. Can be a controversial topic, right, Hannah?
Oh, yeah. It's a very emotionally laden topic, and we can get into that too, actually, because a lot of the emotions that surround it are very about concerns that are very outdated. Very controversial, but also really important and really underrepresented, I think, in the conversations around alternative school. Like, it doesn't get as much airtime as it should.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, even when they talk to me about the potential for homeschooling their children, they want to know right away, what academic subjects do they need to graduate? What do I need to do to make them competitive to get into college or just the workforce after school?
Right.
Isn't their job going to school? Like, isn't their job getting good grades? And so when you talk about those kind of outdated thoughts, and what I think of is it's a paradigm that people are stuck in even when they want to leave the schools.
It is. It really is. And the funny thing about it, when you almost take like a Socratic approach to having this conversation, and people are like, well, we want our kids to go to school so that they can then get a good job. It's like, well, you're preparing them to work, right? Like, that is the goal that we're working towards. So maybe we can introduce that part a little bit earlier in some cases when people want to do things that don't require 8 years of accreditation on top of your traditional high school education.
Right. And on top of that, would you say there are a fair amount of kids today, or probably always were, but we notice it today, who really don't know what work they're being prepared to do?
Yes.
So it's not like when I was a kid, we had shop class. There was even like you could do like auto maintenance stuff in high school, vocational tech. Sometimes you didn't have to be in voc tech. You could just like take those classes. I took cooking, I took sewing. I mean, we had those kinds of classes. Not that that necessarily says like, oh, this is like a trade per se, but it does give you something other than academics. And we don't have that anymore. So it's not like the high school is directly connecting the dots for these kids.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard to theoretically guess what it is that you want to do for the rest of your life without having real world experience. I've heard so many stories of people who were like 2 years deep into a teaching degree, or wherever, maybe longer, actually, wherever they were doing their first in classroom shadowing experience, and they spent 30 minutes in a classroom and they were like, I've made a grave error. This is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. But they didn't know because they'd never been on the teacher side of the classrooms. They'd never had a chance to see what it would actually be like to work in that field. It was all theory. And I think for so many kids, that's the case, that they go to the guidance counselor's office and they tell the guidance counselor, well, I really like English class. And the guidance counselor is like, well, here's a personality test that you should go take, and it'll tell you your aptitudes. So you fill out the form, and it's this very simple, basic, like you had like the majority purple answers. And so that means that you are really good at communicating with people, and maybe you should be, I don't know, like a librarian or a reporter or something like that. And then kids go and do whatever training they need to work in that field. And then they actually go do it in the real world. And they say, wait a second, like, this is incredibly boring. I don't like this at all. And the future of doing this the prospect of doing this for the next 40 years is incredibly bleak. But there's this sunk cost fallacy of, well, I just sank, I don't know, 80 grand at the least if I got really great scholarships into becoming credentialed to do this type of work. So I guess I better stick it out and do it now. I'm committed. And I think that's a really sad fate for a 22-year-old. Really sad place for them to find themselves. But I think that's a really common byproduct of kids not working before they get all of their credentials to be, so for it to be socially acceptable for them to be working. But also for a lot of kids, they don't need years and years of credentialing to do the types of work that they want to be doing. So why are we making them wait? Why do you have to become a well-rounded adult and get a liberal arts degree before you go get a job that you would have been qualified to do as a junior in high school? Like, the argument is that it makes you a more well-rounded person, but listen to podcasts on your commutes and stuff. Like, you can become a well-rounded person in other ways. So a lot of the arguments start to kind of fall apart when you really start digging into them, but they're so culturally accepted that we just don't ever question them.
Well, also, people think the only way you can graduate high school and get that all important diploma, and let's be honest, it kind of is. It's a rare job, even in the trades, that will hire you if you don't at least have a GED, if you don't have a high school diploma. It's the credential that, college degrees people are starting to wake up to, like, yeah, maybe you don't need that, but we are nowhere near, and probably won't ever be near, a place where it's like, yeah, high school diploma optional. Okay. You'd have to demonstrate a whole lot of experience specializing in something to get away with that, or military experience or something else. And even the military, I think, wants a high school diploma at this point. So what do you say to those folks who say, well, how am I going to have my 16-year-old go get a job working more than a couple hours, like 10 hours a week or something, and still graduate high school?
I think
what do we say to them?
I think this really actually is one of those rare situations where you can have your cake and eat it too, because there's so much fluff padding every single step of the high school process that you can very easily get all of the prerequisite stuff that you actually need to get a diploma in 5 hours a day at the most. And that's really generous. Online apps like Khan Academy for all of your math and your science credits, it's mastery based. So you're not moving forward unless you understand the concept, which can slow you down sometimes, but it also actually speeds things up, because when kids progress through a subject with like 80% completion rates, there's all these gaps that get missed that means that they're lacking context when they get to the more advanced topics, and those more advanced topics end up taking way longer because they don't understand the fundamentals that make up these more advanced topics. So when you move a little faster, or slower rather, through some of the early stuff, it actually makes the things that come later faster. So
yeah, that's a really good point, that the way that school is structured, where, you have a year of this and then a year of this, and then is arbitrary. I don't think that parents realize that doesn't necessarily mean it literally takes 9 months to get through that material. For your child, it might take longer, it might take less time, depending what else they're doing. But the point, as we said in our last show, we're not raising high school graduates, we're raising people, we're raising adults. And so they can graduate, in the winter, they can graduate in the fall, they can graduate in the summer. I think a lot of people assume that if you didn't homeschool from the beginning, or if you didn't start in 9th grade, or if you didn't, like, why would I pull my child out as a junior, or what? And I guess what I would want to say from a practical standpoint is, you have this kind of opportunity. So in other words, the requirements to graduate high school when you're homeschooling in many states, may be different. They are for my state. They may be for yours. You have to look it up. They may be different than if they were literally physically present in the building. And you have a certain number of hours, but you're the one doing the transcript. So you could count some of those work hours, depending what the job is. You could count some of the work hours towards, they have a class in high school now called career readiness or something, where they sit in a classroom and they study stuff. So you could count that as credit. And I guess my point is, you're in charge of it. So you have more leeway as to what counts as coursework or credits. There's community college classes that count for double. So if your child if you pull them out, and as a homeschooled student, they can go to the community college for free because they're still in high school, they haven't graduated. You can have them take an English class, and it counts for 2 English classes. So, there are things that you could do that create the space and time for them to go get a semi full-time job,
Yeah.
or taking the career path at the community college. So it's like not really a job, but it's directly related to a job. Like it's not theory anymore. We now have application, but they're 16. So they're going to be 2 years ahead of everybody else when they're done.
Yeah. I think you have to think about what exactly it is that you're preparing your kid for. And I think you have to be really willing to be really honest about your answer to that question. Because again, if they're not incredibly academically inclined, if they're not incredibly nerdy and they're not, looking to do something that requires years upon years of college experience, then is it actually a more effective education to move your kid? Like, is working actually more effective in moving your kid towards where they want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Because getting that head start can also be really powerful. One, the
Mhm.
more robust your resume, the more likely it is that people are going to want to hire you. But also, I think young people actually have a really outsized advantage in the workforce. And I've seen this. This isn't just theory. I've seen this for years with the kids who come through Praxis. When you're young, people are more impressed by the work that you do because they're factoring in your age, and they're more likely to want to help you because they just think it's so cool that a young person is hungry to grow and is taking on this level of responsibility and is excited to be working. And you're going to get types of opportunities that it's just harder to get when you're a little bit older, which is weird. Like, people don't, I think that's culturally counterintuitive, because people think that when you're older, you have more experience and you have more credibility and people are more likely to take you seriously. But I
But they're
actually
less
don't think that's
impressed. That is
true.
a fact. I'll
I
tell
think
you.
that
Mhm.
people, when you're younger, I think people just, there's a different kind of taking you seriously that happens. And you can take advantage of that and land jobs and opportunities and relationships with mentors in a really different way that actually makes that career growth acceleration happen even faster. Like, I know 22-year-olds who've been in the workforce for like 5 years working in startups and are director of marketing at a company where they're working jobs that 30-year-olds would be fighting over. And
Mhm.
part of how they got this far this fast is because they were able to land opportunities because the people who were hiring them were so impressed that some 17-year-old kid or some 19-year-old kid wanted to be working in this type of job, let alone was
Mhm.
able to command the skill set that made them qualified for it because they put in the work to build those skills. So I think, like, it's not just that you're getting a slower start if you wait the 4 years that you spend going to college after high school,
Mhm.
but you're actually losing out on some advantages
Mhm.
by waiting. And I think, like, it really is amazing how much most professionals love ambitious young people.
Well, I
And
think at this point they like to see ambition, period, and
also
initiative.
true.
And the other nice thing when they have somebody that way who's young is they can imagine the intellectual capital, the human capital that is going to be built up in bringing you on, training you, et cetera, is going to pay off for longer. Even if you do leave after a couple of years or whatever, there's still the sense that if you did decide to stay, if they could keep you there, that you have more years. And somebody like me is kind of like, well, how long are you gonna really be here? Right. So the other thing too is, and I've talked about this on my locals channel, is they don't have to be concerned with bad habits they need to break or expectations that you have that, won't be met because you have no what do you know to expect? You haven't had a job, so you're probably most of these kids are probably just hungry and they have a lot of uh drive if they're going to be there at all. And I think that people like that. They're realizing they have to train everybody anyway. Even the people who come out of high school or college are coming in needing some kind of training. But to be able to train or mold somebody exactly the way you want them, to be, or to take advantage of the fact that they're younger and willing to take more risks, This can happen because I think it's partly being young and the mindset is a little bit more open, right? And the second thing is these kids are not literally living on their own. If they still live at home, they have a like a I don't know if I want to call it the luxury, but they have one less thing to worry about, right? They can work for less money, which it means something. So that gives them a leg up. The value relative to what they're going to be paid is higher. And I think what most parents don't realize is that there are opportunities out there for their kids. I think the assumption is that it's fast food or nothing. Like no one's going to hire my 17-year-old to do anything, or no one's going to hire my. Talk about that, Hannah, because I know you have a lot of firsthand experience with that. How do we dispel that myth that the only jobs you can get if you are 16 or 17 or 18, if you're not a high school graduate yet or a college graduate, are in service industry?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is just working in the service industry isn't necessarily a bad thing either. You can still
Oh,
learn
right.
really
I didn't
well
mean
working in
that. I just
service.
meant they think it's limited to that. Like it's
Right.
only
Well, I
that.
think
And
I think
then,
this is important to touch on though, because I think a lot
yeah,
of people do kind of poo-poo working in service industry, and I will argue this point all day that you can learn more working in a service job than you would learn in the average classroom. Like average service job, average classroom, you're better served spending that time in the service job because you're learning more real world transferable things, and you're also being challenged to problem solve and respond to situations far more than you are in the classroom.
can we
Um,
break that down? Can we hang out there
yeah,
for like a minute?
totally.
Um, talk about that in some more granularity, because I agree with you completely and saw that happen with my daughter when she got her job at Chick-fil-A. And I also felt it transferred some of the skills she gained through that transferred back to the academic work. But tell me what you've seen.
Well, sidebar, when I worked on the applications and admissions team at Praxis, we loved people who came from Chick-fil-A. Whenever we saw Chick-fil-A on somebody's resume, it was immediately like the probability that we were going to accept that person skyrocketed. There's something about the way that Chick-fil-A trains their employees that is just remarkably effective. And the kids who come out of Chick-fil-A, like, I don't know, maybe the ones who don't apply to Praxis aren't so cool, but everybody who applied to Praxis from Chick-fil-A was amazing. So I love hearing about people landing first jobs at Chick-fil-A. I think everybody should, because it's such a great training ground for anything else that you could want to do after. Their training really is phenomenal.
Specifically, what did they come in kind of knowing or able to do that you think is special or makes them well suited to these apprenticeships?
Their level of professionalism is much higher than the average. Chick-fil-A does a really great job. Like their customer service is phenomenal. They're world renowned for their amazing service. You talk about Chick-fil-A and everybody's like, my pleasure, because like everybody knows that.
Yeah, my daughter's at Starbucks now. She went from Chick-fil-A to Starbucks, so they pay so much more, and she got the job like that. But to this day, she's my pleasure, my pleasure. And people are like, you worked at Chick-fil-A, didn't you? It's like, even in the Starbucks, they're like, you're a Chick-fil-A person working at Starbucks. And she's like, guilty, because it's
Yeah,
my pleasure always.
well, that case in point, it's probably not just the fact that she says my pleasure, even though that's a dead
No,
giveaway,
it's true.
but it's
She's
the level
really
of
nailed it.
customer
Yeah.
service that she brings. People at Chick-fil-A, like the professionalism
Yeah,
and
that's true.
the um for lack of a better way of putting it, just the likableness of people who work at Chick-fil-A, like they really drill that into their employees. It's like you have to be polite, you have to smile, you have to be courteous, you have to make sure that the customer feels seen and heard and cared for, and everything about the language that you're going to use is going to convey
Right.
that sensibility. I think that's so powerful, and I think they're also so incredibly efficient, and their standards are really high. The cleanliness is way above the average for a fast food restaurant. The speed of
Yeah.
service is way above average. You can see it in the camaraderie of the teams when you go through a Chick-fil-A drive-through. Like, everybody's being super supportive of each other. They're super communicative. Everybody's clearly happy to be there. There's nobody who's kind of like sulking around going, I can't believe that I have to work at Chick-fil-A. You
Yeah,
wouldn't
they tend to
survive
pull them
there if you did
inside
that.
and stick them back making milkshakes when they do that because people have their days. But
Yeah, but
it's true. It's
it,
true.
it's so you learn this standard of professionalism where it's just like, this is how you handle customers and this is
And
how you handle
hustle.
professional responsibilities.
And
That is,
hustle that is needed in every job. I'm sorry, I don't care
yeah,
what
and
job you do, you need to hustle.
if you're getting that in your first working experience, that's a really powerful foundation. So kids would come out of Chick-fil-A and apply to Praxis, and we would know that they'd be more communicative than average. They'd have this base level professionalism. Usually they were higher achievers than the average too. Like, they understood how to hustle and they wanted to hustle.
Yeah.
And I don't know quite where, like, what in their Chick-fil-A experience led to that specifically, but they just tended to be hard workers. They tended to be more responsible than average. And they were just such a joy to work with because, again, like, they understood that,
Right.
that sort of implicit.
Well, they're consistently busy. And,
Yeah.
as fast food restaurants go, because of the reputation, they're consistently busy. They do a bang up, drive-through business. So in order to, when you've got lines going down the street, you've got to, as you said, you got to be very efficient. So you're not going to make it if you can't hustle and you can't get along with people and you can't smile at people. And then when you add, like, for my daughter, her first 2 years of work at all at a Chick-fil-A during COVID. So outside every single day, every kind of weather, literally wearing a plastic box sometimes when it was raining because they didn't put up a roof with fans or whatever until after she left. She went to a different job. And, they're out there in the driving rain. They're out there in the, when it was cold and, you had people who were like, pull your mask up or have you been vaccinated? I mean, so they had to get along with other people like the worst possible time for the people that were coming through. They weren't just ordering fast food. They were like, this is my one time out of the house, this week, make it count kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think, and obviously that's an unusual experience, but I do think that contributed to her getting the next job was they said, oh, you did what? Like you did that, because she had no trouble at all. And people say, well, Starbucks is always hiring, whatever. Yeah, that's true. But, being a barista is hard work. We poo-poo that too, right? We poo-poo the like, oh, the Starbucks workers, but to do it well, and this is true because if you've ever been in one and been like, why is it taking 10 minutes to make my coffee? That to do it well and to do it fast and everything is difficult. It's not easy. So they do look at that. And I'm glad you pointed out that fast food and service work in general gives those kind of skills. Because I don't think people break it down quite like that.
Right. And to go back to your original question about like expounding on the comparison of that to the classroom, like just think about like, because I think this is important to highlight too. Every single one of those things that I just listed off are base level prerequisites for most jobs.
That's true.
And at least doing well in most jobs. If you're not learning it before you land the job, you have to learn it pretty much immediately once you get on the job. And a lot of the stuff, like, you don't have to understand that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell in order to do a good job in your first job. Yes, there's like, I am very pro having a well-rounded liberal arts education as an individual. I'm not pro that being a prerequisite to start working. I'm not pro that being a separate thing from working. And I'm not pro having to go through the traditional system in order to obtain that, because I think the idea that traditional education has a monopoly on that has always been flawed, but it is incredibly outdated and flawed now that we live in the world of the internet, where you can go pull up the world's best lecturers on every single topic on YouTube, and you can get this education for free, and you can listen to it while you're working a manual labor job or while you're commuting to and from work or after work. That's not
driving a delivery truck or the landscaping, doing
my first job, my first real job, I worked on a vegetable farm and orchard, and I used to listen to podcasts and audiobooks when I was weeding carrots, like and picking beans. Like, I would listen to There's this really great, I don't know if you're familiar with Project Gutenberg, which is an online
Oh,
site where any book
I think
that's
I've
in the
heard of
public
it.
domain is free to download. And then they have a sister company called LibriVox, which is a free audiobook platform. And people take volunteers, so it's all free, take books that are on Project Gutenberg and they read them aloud. And then you can listen to them. It's like free audiobooks of any book that's over 100 years old that hasn't had its copyright renewed. So I would listen to
Wow.
like super weird niche. Like I'd listen to stuff like Jane Eyre, like and like Mark Twain books, but I'd also listen to like super weird niche. Like there was this book on Arctic exploration that was written like 100 years ago that I listened to, and
Oh, how
I listened to
cool.
some I think I listened to part of Moby Dick, and that was like really hard to follow along with while I was working. Like that was a little too dense, I think.
Right.
But I listened to like old lectures on like 100-year-old works on the psychology of success and like Wallace Wattles. And I listened to books on the theory of literature from like before the modern novel was even invented. I listened to all this weird, I'm pretty sure I listened to some Aristotle, like all of this weird niche stuff while I was
Wow.
working on the farm. And it was amazing because it was actually easier to listen and consume for me while I was doing something physical. But
Yep.
I was also making money and also exploring all these things that I thought was interesting and just kind of rounding out my I don't know, my kind of base level understanding of what this world was that I was living in.
Yeah.
And these two things are not like you don't have to pick one or the other. And yes,
Right.
what I was doing was like super disjointed, and it was just kind of I was just like picking stuff that sounded fun, and it wasn't like an organized education by any means. But you can certainly make it that way if you have a specific goal that you're working
Well, and
toward. So it doesn't have to be one or the other.
if you think back to the past, and I'm going back to, let's say, like my grandfather's time, maybe even my dad's time, there's stories all over of people say, "Well, I had an 8th grade education. I had an 8th grade education." And I have to laugh because when you meet these people are like, "Yeah, but your 8th grade education was more like our 12th grade education." And what I mean by that is that no, I mean it's just true. They've
No.
first of all, they've stretched out how long it takes to teach the same volume of stuff. They've added a bunch of new things that our parents never took that take a lot of time
Yeah.
and really I don't think add much of anything, right? And so they're teaching soft skills. Now, do you believe that your 16-year-old is going to learn the soft skills of communication and working with different kinds of people and understanding different people's points of view, blah blah blah, blah all that, all the soft skills, the 21st century work skills they tell you they're going to teach you in the SEL program? Do you think they're going to do it better working at Chick-fil-A or the like, or in the classroom? And so whereas our parents and grandparents, when they were doing their academic work, by the time they got through 8th grade, they'd learned a lot of, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell kind of facts. And the level they went to in high school was an order of magnitude higher. They were reading classic literature. They were learning Latin and Greek. My grandfather learned both Latin and Greek in public school. So, we have to remember that too, that and if you are homeschooling, let's say, from the beginning or at least 6th grade on, you can do that. So if liberal arts education is super important to you and to your child, and you want to leave open the possibility that when they graduate or they're 18 or they're 19 or something, they do want to go to college for a bachelor's degree in something, but you see the value in them working also, or they're not sure, or they're trying to decide, guess what? You can do a lot of this in middle school. Like all of it's arbitrary.
Yeah.
What gets covered when based on the school calendar and the grade is completely arbitrary. That doesn't mean that your child can't possibly learn algebra 2 until, 10th grade or something. That's not how it
No,
works.
you can. There are tons and tons of kids in the world who are learning algebra 2 in 8th grade because they're using
Exactly.
programs that allow them to move faster than the standard school model does.
Right.
Again, these online apps and these programs where it's all adaptive, it's all mastery based, it's all built around, it's all tailored to the individual
Exactly.
kids' experience and needs and how quickly they can move through things. Like if they're not held back by the classroom and they're motivated, they can move through this stuff really fast. And so again, like it comes back to the you can have your cake and eat it too thing. Like kids can also, again, it doesn't take that long to cover all of the prerequisite stuff that you're doing when you're in high school to have the diploma and say like, okay, I've checked the box, like I have a base level high school education. You
Right.
can do that in the morning and work in the afternoon, or you can work in the morning and do
Exactly.
school in the afternoon. That's what I did when I was in high school. um I had some entrepreneurial ventures early in high school where I was like
Right.
making, we talked about this summer, I was making pocket change and a little bit more than that. And then when I was in between my junior and senior year of high school, I landed this job at this farm, this vegetable farm and orchard. And because I was homeschooled, I was able to work the full season and not just the summer, which is part of why I landed the job, is because they knew they could keep me. And also they had homeschooled their son and they'd had homeschoolers working with them and they
Right.
loved homeschoolers. So they were very
Exactly.
excited to have me. But I was able to work, like I'd go in at the farm at like 7 in the morning and I'd work the farm day, and then I'd come home in the late afternoon and I'd do some schoolwork. And it's like I was able to structure my work where I was able to double up on this
Right.
because I had the flexibility, but also it didn't take that long to do the school stuff, which is
Exactly.
really important. And I think that's something, like there are programs like Acton Academy where they build real life work right into their curriculum. Like in high school, a lot of their kids do a blended, in the morning they'll do like traditional schoolwork, and in the
Mhm.
afternoons they'll go apprentice
Right.
with professionals who are working locally in fields that they find interesting. So if they want to be a journalist, they'll go apprentice with a local news reporter, or if they think they want to be an academic, they'll go apprentice with somebody who's working in academics. Or if they think they want to be um, like a baker, they'll go apprentice at a local bakery and they'll get this hands-on experience and this context, which helps them drive their education, right? Because they
Right.
understand now what's actually required to do this job. So they have more context and like what's actually important for them to learn. But they
Right.
also get to try this out and see if they even like it, which is so
Right.
important. And this is a model that I've seen a bunch of different alternative schools embrace in different ways, like Alpha School in Texas.
Mhm.
The kids aren't working, but they're working on projects for 4 years in high school. It's kind of a similar model where they do their school in the morning and then the afternoon they're working on this project that's called their masterpiece, which is like their big portfolio piece for
Mhm.
high school. And so there's all these different ways that people are experimenting, and it with great success in
Right.
setting up their kids' education or their own education in a way where they're doing this hybrid of school and work. And it's a much more organic transition into
Mhm.
adulthood. And it's actually a much more well rounded, again, if we go back to what we said about
Right.
what are we preparing kids for, it's actually a much more well rounded education towards like for what they're going to do when they graduate high school,
Right.
whether they go to college or not, which is kind of actually an irrelevant point here. Like, even if your kid's going to college, they should be working first.
I
So
would agree, because then, like you said, you could, what if something you learn at work changes the direction that you take at college, or quite frankly, changes what college you'd want to go to? You won't know until you do that. But I want to make sure we talk this time too about the practical aspects of getting your kid a job or helping your kid think about getting a job, because there are going to be two situations that I can see right now. One, on the one hand, you have that super self-motivated kid who says, I want to go to work, I want to make money, and you're not going to have to light a fire under them to do this. They're going to be eager to go out there, and they maybe just need a little practical help from you, like a ride to the interview or a little guidance on the resume or something. And yeah, you can make a resume for a kid based on, references, or, babysit, whatever, like even their schoolwork. You can still build one up. But then you have those kids, especially if they're in public school or coming out of public school, just where they're also in the cultural expectation of, I don't do this, I go to school. And or if I get a job, it's only a couple hours after school. And what I'm hearing from some students is, my grades will suffer if I go get a job. I won't have time to do my homework and go to work. So, for the parent who knows it's going to be good for their kid, even to help them manage their time better, right? To do the homework. What suggestions do you have? And where can these kids, all the kids of both categories, where are some places they can look to find these kinds of opportunities if, for example, they don't have a Chick-fil-A down the street, or they live in, New York City. So while there are fast food places, maybe there's like, they have a lot more opportunities to try other things, or, what do you suggest? What are places they can look?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer that part first and then come
Okay.
back to the like more motivational side.
Okay.
Just because the answers are bubbling up faster for the second half of this
No.
question.
Good,
There's
good, good, good,
so
good.
much
Okay.
here. There's
Okay.
so much here.
Okay.
Just like we've made this point many times in the realm of education, like we live in the era of the internet, things are different now. The same is true for jobs too. Like if you think that you're a good writer or you're a good graphic designer, go get on Fiverr or Upwork and start selling your design work. Like you don't have to be, you could be in the middle of the desert in Nevada and you can be making a very healthy living as a 16-year-old with some design chops or some other skill set.
Oh, and the benefit is your client doesn't even have to know that you're 16.
Exactly. Nobody, and that's the most telling thing, is when somebody doesn't know how old you are and they take you seriously. Like that's really when this whole idea that, well, you're too young to be doing this kind of work starts to break down, because when you're not factoring in the bias of age and you're just looking at the quality of work, and the quality of work can compare to many adults, and that's often the case with teenagers. It's like, hold up, okay, wait a second, why do we think that kids can't do this? And a lot of it comes back again to this like cultural bias that we have, that I want to come back to, because I think there's actually a couple of really important things to break down here, but I don't want to get too far off tangent.
No. Keep going
Here.
Keep going.
But so you can find stuff online, and like I would say for most kids, start to develop an awareness of what you find interesting, even if you don't know specifically, and completely let go of the idea that those interests have to stay consistent for any period of time. If you're really interested in, I don't know, like photography right now, and then in a year you're like, you know what, I hate cameras, I don't ever want to touch one again, that's cool, that's fine. You've learned something valuable, and you've probably built up a lot of soft skills from exploring photography that you can go apply to your next thing, like how you pitched photographers to let you shadow them, and how you handled email communications, and how you, like, the professionalism that you learn from shadowing people on shoots and stuff like that. All that applies to the next thing that you want to go do. Like you're always leveling up, even if you're jumping from field to field as you're moving upwards. Like I don't even know how many different careers that I thought I was going to have when I was just getting started, and how many things that I tried. Like I shadowed a chiropractor, and who like still gets excited every time I come into his office 8 years later. He's like, oh, I remember when you came in and shadowed me. You're the first person who ever shadowed me. And I'm like, I had such a great time. And I walked out going, I never want to be a chiropractor. But like, I legit thought, like, I was taking anatomy classes because I legit thought I wanted to go into the healthcare world. And then I was taking journalism classes because I legit thought I wanted to be a journalist. And I was working with photographers and videographers for a while because I thought I wanted to build a photography business. And all of these things got cast aside as I developed more and more awareness of what I wanted to do. But also I messaged this morning some of the people that I met in the photography world years ago. I was like, hey, I have some questions actually for a project that I'm working on. I'm like looking for a videographer. Can you help me? Those network connections were still valuable investments, even though I didn't actually want to be a videographer for a profession after all. So don't be too married to like finding like your commitment to anything. Like you're just dating right now, and you're probably going to be dating for years before you're ready to settle down and get married to something. And maybe you'll never want to get married. Maybe you'll want to date forever in the career realm, and you want to bounce between things for your whole professional life. And that's totally fine. So let's start to develop this list of things that you find interesting.
There are a lot of parents though that don't think it's totally fine.
I'm right specifically for the teens though.
But I know, totally but what I'm saying is but what I'm saying is they if they can't connect the dots between either the job and just making money.
Yeah.
Like it's just, so in other words, the shadowing or internship or working for peanuts while gaining valuable skills, there are a lot of parents who are like, no. And then they'd want that, they might even tell their child, no, you can't intern with the interior designer in town who can't really afford to pay you, but they're willing to, let you run around and learn and teach you everything they know. But they can just, buy you lunch like that they can't put you on the payroll. you can't do that because you really should be going to work at the Chick-fil-A, for example, and pocketing all the money. Now, I mean, they're both good jobs, right? They're both potentially good, but I think that's why I said, if they don't literally have to have the money, then let them decide. Maybe they really want to see what that world is like, because what if their plan was to go to design school and they learn from doing that they don't want to go, and that changes things, or they learn yes they do, but they want to be in some aspect of it they wouldn't have known otherwise. Like they
Yeah.
want to do commercial, they don't want to do residential, like who knows. So I think there's still a fair few parents who really are uncomfortable with the idea of their kids being interns or low paid or not paid, or even just doing jobs with adults in a career path that they can't see how that's going to be a good career path.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is that after your kid turns 18, you don't get a say anymore. Like it's at the mercy of your kid whether or not they're going to let you have input.
Right.
Um and so one, I think having these really strong lines of communication before they turn 18 definitely increases your chances of getting to have input once they're adults, but also like you can direct them on whatever path you think they should be on until they turn 18.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they're not going to go change their mind and do the thing that they think they want to do after they're legally old enough to not listen to you anymore.
Right.
And you're saving everybody a lot of time and headache and often money if you let them do that first. Like if you're dead set on your kid being a doctor and they think for certain they want to go this interior design route, you're better off letting them try that when they're young and see if they even like it or not, than
Right.
have them like force them down the like, no, you're going to work this job that we think is more acceptable, or you're not going to work because you're going to be studying all the time so you can make sure that you get into a great pre-med program. And then kids go down that route until they're like, no, I have this burning dream, I have to go try interior design. And all of this time and money and resources that's been sunk into something that your kid was never bought into is wasted. Like you're better off letting your kids try things that you don't agree with and discovering for themselves that they don't like it
Right.
than you are just forcing them to not do the thing because you don't think it's a good idea.
Well,
You're just
and
going to lose the kid in the
if I can just
process.
make a plug too, and maybe you'll join me in this, maybe you won't. But parents, please don't say you'll never make a living doing that. Please don't say that's, like nobody's successful at that. Or, this kind of like naysaying. You see the stories all the time of the parents whose kids end up being, famous movie stars and musicians and whatever. And they'll say the one common thread is my parents always supported me. My parents always, believed in me. My parents said, go for it. My parents were there for me all the time. You don't hear the stories of, yeah, they told me I would fail and it wouldn't work and there was no point in bothering. And like, that's not usually
Yeah.
the story that you hear. Now, they could be embellishing and making their parents sound great because they, it's good marketing. I don't know. But I don't see the harm in saying to somebody, now, this is not the same thing as saying you will be successful. There's a big difference between, blowing sunshine and saying, you know what, now or never, like, go for it while you're young, while the risk is low, while it's your passion, give it a shot. You never know. People do succeed. Like there's a difference between that and saying you're definitely going to be getting an Oscar someday, like,
Right.
and I still think it's preferable to saying you'll never be successful. Only the 0.1% people get that, and that's a pointless waste of your time. And I hear it. I'm sorry to say, I hear that so often.
And it's so
So
psychologically
often.
scarring. Like that's a
Mhm.
really big, especially coming from like, even if on the surface level you think your parents are full of it, like on a deeper level, we do respect the takes of those who are in positions of authority
Right.
over us and who are, we've been observing as role models of how to do life for our entire lifetimes. That does carry a lot of weight. And I think there are a lot of people out there who actually would have been really successful in the career paths that they dreamed of having, but
Right.
somebody planted these seeds of doubt that they could never shake. And I see that very often too. And it makes me very sad. So yeah, I agree completely. I think like your kid you really have to trust that your kid, like, again, you're raising a whole human, you're raising a fully fledged adult. That's the goal. So you
Right.
want to help them build habits and thought processes and ways of living that
And tolerance
an
for failure and disappointment.
right, that an
So, like,
adult
what's
that
the
you would
worst that's
respect
gonna happen that doesn't work
has. Yeah.
out? But it didn't work out on their watch, like, on their terms. And so then they have to go through the process of working through that, and
Mhm.
at no time are they gonna be able to lean on, "Well, it's your fault because you didn't even let me try." And I'm not saying you do that for self-preservation, that's for your child.
Yeah.
It's not a
It's all about
healthy
your kid.
coping
It's not about you.
mechanism. Right. It's not a healthy coping mechanism for someone to wanna blame outside forces. So, remove that as an
Yeah.
option.
Yeah.
So, for
Encourage your
their
kids to
sake.
practice the habits that they would be practicing as
Mhm.
full-grown, self-sufficient, healthy, and well-adjusted adults. And
Exactly.
the willingness to take responsibility for the things that they want and to go try it and to, like, know when it's like, "You know what? I've put enough time into this. It's not paying off for me anymore. There's something else that's gonna deliver a bigger reward. I wanna go chase that instead." That is the habit of a well-adjusted adult. There are a lot of adults who don't do that, but I would argue that that's a sign of not being well-adjusted. But anyway,
And the
I
earlier you
think
start, the more practice
yeah.
you get.
Exactly, and the more chances you have to get it right. But to go back to your question about, like, the practical side of this, like, where kids can start, the internet is, like, again, like, don't be afraid of looking for if there's an online creator that you really admire, or there's, a YouTube channel that you really love, or there's an online brand that you think is super cool. I know multiple internet creators who have 16, 17-year-old interns because somebody cold emailed them and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this kid is amazing. I want to help them." So don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of, again, going on online platforms like Fiverr and Upwork. Don't be afraid of looking for just like jobs boards for internship opportunities for companies that you think are
Yeah.
cool. Don't be afraid of the service industry. Again, that's a great prerequisite for, like, pretty much any other job. Not prerequisite,
And
that's the wrong term, but, like, foundation for any other job that you could have in future.
don't be afraid of your
Um
heroes either. So, I mean, I learned a valuable lesson, pretty early on when I decided to shift gears and go into food to
mhm,
being a pastry chef and so forth. Um, I had heroes. I had, especially in the New York restaurant scene. And I had gotten a job working at one restaurant, and then I wanted to kind of, learn from other people. I picked up the phone and I called 2 of my favorite chefs in New York and just, like, asked to talk to them. And
love
I mean, granted, I was a
that.
little older, I was, like, 30, but but the point is I think they'd be 10 times more impressed if it's a 17-year-old or something saying, "Hello, I'd like to speak to," and my example was Lydia Bastianich. I was like, "I would like to speak to Lydia, please." "Well, who is this?" Now, here was my pitch. I said, "I'm a person who has eaten dinner at her restaurant for my birthday every year since I was 12." And I mean, that was a true statement. And so I said, "And I'm now pursuing a career in the food industry. I've been working at this restaurant, but I've just want to talk to her. I just want to talk to her about my career. I want to talk to her about, to see if she has any suggestions for me. Even if there were any possibilities of working in her kitchen. I really just want to talk to her at her convenience. Anytime, I'll make myself available." I got a call back. "Come in at such and such a time." I was shocked, but I went in, I had a wonderful conversation with her. She was trying to put together kind of a job for me, and I got offered another job, but she wished me well. And it was like, "No problem. So glad I met you," kind of thing. And that conversation was like talking to a mentor. And because I didn't say I want a job like right out of the gate, I just said, "You're one of my, heroes. You're somebody that I look up to as a person I'd want to learn from or about. I've read all your books, etc." She probably doesn't get a lot of calls like that because a lot of people shy away. They assume they're busy. They assume they'll never talk. This person isn't going to talk to me. Why are they going to talk to me? They might not. Let's say the odds are they don't, but it's not a guarantee that they won't. So, what's the worst that happens? You pick up the phone, you call, or you send an email or whatever, and they don't respond. Oh, well, you're in the same place you were 5 minutes ago. But if they do, and then you can make a connection, why the heck not? And the same thing goes with, anybody else that you might look up to in a field that you're, looking into, I would encourage the old fashioned go door to door too. So we've got the internet. So like you've got Hannah's generation is, like the internet is like everything. And it's fantastic. You can do tons there. And then you've got me, the old fart, who's over here saying, do not underestimate the power of your feet. And actually, because people aren't expecting it. They're not expecting you to show up at their door. They're not expecting you to knock on the business door and say, hi, my name is, here's my resume. I am, 16, I'm 17. My goal in life is to learn from people like you. I would sweep the floor. I would, whatever. I just want to be around people doing this for a living. Please keep me in mind. And
that's what I did for my first jobs too. I went and showed up. I was 17 years old. I went and showed up at the farm that I had, this local organic vegetable farm that I thought was just the coolest thing in the world. And I wanted to work there. And I was just like, when knocked on their door, I was like, hey, are you hiring? Here's who I am. I want to work with you. And they were like, we just filled our last position for the season. I'm so sorry. And I was so disappointed, but I was like, can I leave my number? If something opens up there, absolutely. And then I think 10 days later, I got an email and they said, somebody just quit and we're short staffed for the season now. Can you come in for an interview? And they recognized right away that I was hungry to learn. I was super excited about local agriculture at the time. I just wanted to learn everything about it. I was really excited to work on a farm. I thought that sounded like this really romantic, fun thing since I was 5. And they were excited to give me a chance, even though everybody else who was working on the farm was a college graduate. They were like, yeah, we'd love to have you. So it does pay off to go door to door. Deb, you know what we should do? We should do a whole show on networking for young people and how to meet your heroes and how to build relationships with people who can help you in your career, because I feel like that warrants a much deeper conversation than we have time for here. And I think it's a really important topic too.
Yeah. Well, maybe we do that next week. I mean, I really think it's important. My stepmother used to say, you don't ask, you don't get. And she would say it repeatedly. So, I would sit there and say, oh, well, I don't know. And then she says, you don't ask, you don't get. It's not going to just come flying through the window like the letter from Hogwarts. It's not how it works. So guess what? You get to be a wizard. It's not like that. You have to go out and grab your own letter from Hogwarts. But yeah, let's work on that. I think it'd be a great show. Anything we missed on this one though? I think let's sum it up. Wrap it.
Well, I have a couple more thoughts that we didn't touch on that I think are really important too, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to make sure we don't forget to review.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I won't. I'll be succinct with this. But I just think it's important to note that people have such an aversion to the idea of kids working.
Yes.
And it's a very cultural thing. I think this may be a controversial hot take, I don't know, but I think it's a very cultural thing that comes from realities that existed 80 years ago that have just sort of been literally grandfathered in. Our grandfathers lived in this world and then we just sort of adopted these assumptions. People have such a, you talk about kids working and immediately people go to well, child labor. And I've heard people
they're going to be the mill that catches fire and they're locked in and they're
right. And it's not the same. We're not living in the same world anymore. It's not the same thing. And when you look at, I saw this chart recently and I'm trying to remember where I saw it, but it was a graph of child labor numbers around the turn of the century, and child labor laws were enacted in the 30s, I think. And by the 20s, child labor was pretty much completely gone. So it's not like we had to implement all of this legislation to make sure that kids weren't in the coal mines, which sidebar, kids weren't even actually strong enough to work in mines. So they weren't working as minors. But these child labor laws, we didn't want kids working anyway, because who wants their kid to be working when their kid could be learning? It's not in most people's psychology to want that. So this whole child labor aversion thing is just it's a very separate issue from kids having jobs while they're in school. And there's
also they have visions of Indonesia and Chinese kids in factories assembling iPhones or whatever.
And it's that's a totally separate thing. Right. Yes, that totally warrants discussion, but that's not what we're talking about at all. And there's also this culturally baked in assumption about how the world works that I think does come from the generations in the early 20th century who didn't get a high school education and felt like they wanted better for their
Mhm.
kids, like they felt like it was a deficit. And I speak from personal experience on this one. Um my grandfather was born in 1914,
Mhm.
and he went to 8th grade, and he was not, I think there was a local high school, but his dad said, no, you don't, like, I did fine with an 8th grade education, and you're going to do fine too. You're going to come work on the farm. And my grandfather always felt a real sense of grief around the fact that he didn't get to go to high school because he loved learning. And he took like advanced learning classes as an adult for most of his life. And I think he actually, in a lot of ways, was a lot more well educated than a lot of people who just sort of like check the box of going to high school because you're supposed to. But I remember my mom telling me that he really wanted my mom to go to college because he never had the chance to. And I
Right.
think there's a lot of that culturally, that's sort of this generational thing that's playing out where people didn't get these educational opportunities and felt like it was a deficit and wanted better for their kids. And then their kids grew up assuming that like a good education means you go to college. And then so that sort of got handed down to the next generation of people
Yep.
without this ever really being well examined. And I think it was a flawed set of assumptions to begin with. But I think in
Mhm.
the era of the internet, it's completely different now. Like the internet didn't exist when my grandfather was
Right.
in school. Like he couldn't, if he had extra time after working on the farm, he could go to the library, maybe if he could get there. And it
Right.
probably was a very small local library that didn't have much, if they even had one at all. Whereas people now can be working, and like we said, they can be listening to podcasts and they can be
Right.
watching TED Talks when they go home, and they
Well,
can
it's also, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead.
you're so right, but it's also different in that even when my dad was a kid, and to a certain extent when I was, upward mobility was much more closely tied to whether you had advanced degrees because there were simply fewer white collar jobs. There were
Mhm.
fewer jobs that paid well. Not that let me rephrase, it's not white collar, blue collar, but there were fewer well-paying jobs then that didn't require the college degree in the literal sense, like that you needed that level of education.
Yeah.
With the introduction of the gig economy, the internet, and even just the explosion in the industry, and all kinds of other industries, we and the fact that so many people went to college, we now have a deficit of people in the trades. So the supply and demand has shifted, and you can do very, very well. You can actually do better in an intro job in the trades financially than you can coming out of college. So things
Yeah.
have changed so dramatically that your upward mobility is now not limited by how many credentials you have after your name in terms of academic credentials. It's much more a function of your initiative, your willingness to do things that might, put you in a different class than you grew up in. By class, again, I don't mean the socioeconomic level, but like, let's say you grew up in a white collar world and now you're thinking, you know what? The best thing for me to do is go into like HVAC, plumbing, pipe fitting, like, because those, I mean, I'll make like six figures year
Yeah.
one
You can
doing
easily
pipe
become a
fitting,
millionaire if you start a business doing that. It's not,
right? And
it's
I
very
could go into
achievable.
that. And there are people who's really resistant to that. They're like, I don't know if I work in that culture, like, what's that going to be like? Or I'll have to travel a lot. I'm not. So, point being that the upward mobility is, and the shifting from, where you grew up to what you might want to be, is not limited by your education anymore.
Yeah.
It's limited by very different factors. And I'm not sure that most parents, certainly most guidance counselors, are not there. They have not caught up. They're not even trained to even think about these things most of the time. But I think a lot of parents haven't caught up, and they don't
Yeah.
realize that it's a different world from when we were kids and what was going to be available to us when we graduated high school. And for our kids, there's a lot more flexibility. I just wanted to point that out because I think it's one of the reasons this is so culturally entrenched about the kids working, about the kids working while in school or in lieu of school. I think there are some weird, class slash income, upward mobility issues going on.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I have more things to say on this, but I know we're at about at time. Do you want to do a quick recap before we close out?
Yeah, let's do a quick recap because I want to make sure everybody, who's joining us now knows like it's worthwhile to go back to the beginning and watch.
Yes.
So what have we learned today, Hannah?
We've learned that it's very doable for kids to work while in school while still getting a very adequate high school education. We've learned that there are a lot of benefits to having some working experience before you commit to a specific degree path, if that's the route that your kid is going to take. We've learned that there are some very, very, very tangible and underrated benefits to working young in terms of advantages that you have that you don't necessarily have if you take the traditional path. We've learned that there's a lot of different options available if you're looking to work as a kid, even if you live in the middle of nowhere. The internet there's a lot of options there too for gaining working experience. We didn't touch on this, but also like if your kid's not sure if they want to work, just like tell them when they want things that they have to buy them themselves. And like that's a real motivator. Your kid's going to want a job really fast when they realize the purchasing power that comes from making a little bit of money.
Right.
And we've learned that there's a lot of cultural assumptions around working and personal assumptions that a lot of us have that maybe warrant some reexamination because they're not necessarily coming from a place where they're serving any of the parties who are actually involved in making these decisions anymore. What am I missing? I feel like there's a couple points that we touched on that I didn't hit there.
Well, that, that when kids go to work, if they're reluctant to go to work, and I liked your motivational speech there, but that it can be a thing that improves their academic performance. They can learn to manage their time better. So if your concern is, well, my student isn't doing very well in school, I don't want them to have the time off, working. They need their time to focus on their studies. Consider the possibility that having less time to waste will improve that.
Yeah.
Will actually improve their academic performance, not to mention the, getting acquainted with the adult world and realizing like they want more from whatever the job is that they get at that level can also serve as a motivator that might not currently exist. As Hannah's pointed out many times on the show, there's theory, which is what school is, and there's the application, which is what going to work is at any job. And then we touched briefly on the different ways you could go about getting the job, searching on the internet. So the newfangled ways of searching every which way and writing emails and all that. And then the old ways of pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, making phone calls. People don't expect to get phone calls. So it's not a half bad way. It actually puts you in a category, especially if you're calling someone who's over the age of 40. It's very impressive because they're like, I got a call, it's from a young person, and having good phone manner is very impressive. And we did talk about that too. We talked about how younger people have the distinct advantage that the work they're doing looks that much more impressive because of their youth and inexperience.
Also, getting a job at Chick-fil-A is always a good career move.
Yes, that was we can land there. Chick-fil-A, I would love some sponsorship over here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, did we get like a free meal or something for this
point
today?
We totally should. Now we're not representing Chick-fil-A, but we both agree that it is a great first job. It really is a great first job. So I think that's it. I think we've about covered. So next week, tune in because we're going to talk about what Hannah brought up here, which is a little more in depth on how to reach out to those mentors, those heroes, how to communicate and how to network specifically for kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that you might be like, kids, how do kids network? Oh, they can. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right. It's actually easier. We're going to have fun with this one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm excited. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Please, like, share, comment, subscribe, all the good things. And we'll see you next time. Bye.